Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to solve systems of equations using something called substitution. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. So when we want to solve an equation using substitution, what we're going to do is we're going to take what one variable equals. So for example, here it says x equals 2y minus 13. And we are going to substitute it for the x in the other equation. So what that means is in this first equation, instead of having 2 times x, I'm going to replace the x with what it equals, which is 2y minus 13. So now it'll be 2 times, and then instead of x, 2y minus 13, and then the rest of the equation was plus y equals negative 1. So now I have an equation that only has one variable, the y, so I can solve this to figure out what y equals. So first thing is to distribute. So 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 13 is 26, and then the plus y on the outside comes down and then equals negative 1. Now I'm going to combine like terms. So 4y and y together make 5y, and then the minus 26 equals negative 1. So now I'm going to add 26 to both sides, and I get that 5y equals 25 because negative 1 plus 26 is 25. Divide by 5. And I find out that y equals 5. So now that I know what y equals, I can substitute that into one of the equations to figure out what x equals. So I'm going to take this equation here that says x equals 2, and I'm going to substitute the 5 for the y minus 13. So 2 times 5 is 10, minus 13 is negative 3. So y equals 5 and x equals negative 3. So just to make sure that I actually solved this correctly, I'm going to check my answers. So to do that, I'm going to replace in the original equations the x with negative 3 and the y with 5. So the first equation was 2x plus y equals negative 1. So I'm going to have 2, and then instead of x, negative 3, plus my y was 5 equals negative 1. So 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Plus 5, and negative 6 plus 5 is negative 1, so it works for the first equation. So negative 3 and 5 work for the first equation. Those are a solution. So now I'm going to check to make sure that it also is a solution in the second equation, because in order to be a solution to this system, it has to work for both equations. So the second equation was x equals 2y minus 13. So I'm going to replace the x with the negative 3. And then 2 times the y is 5 minus 13. So negative 3 equals 2 times 5 is 10. And then 10 minus 13 is negative 3. So it checks in this one. So the solution is negative 3, 5. So let's go ahead and try another example. So this time, instead of giving us what x equals, they gave us what y equals. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to replace or substitute the y in the other equation with what it equals, which is 4/3 times x minus 7. So I'm going to take this first equation, and it says 4x minus 3 times y. And so instead of y, I'm going to put what it equaled in the other equation. So 4/3 x minus 7 equals 15. So now what I can do is I can solve this equation because I only have one variable. So I can go ahead and distribute the -3, so 4x, and then the 3's would cancel out here and I'd be left with -4x, and then -3 times -7 would be 21 equals 15. So now here I have 4x minus 4x. Well, 4x minus 4x is 0. Plus 21 equals 15. Well, 0 plus 21 is just 21, and 21 does not equal 15. So just like when we're solving equations, if we get something where our variables cancel out and we get something that's not true, then that means that there is no solution. So to check that, okay, the likelihood of us guessing the right answer if there was a solution is really unlikely. So we're not going to just guess an answer and see if it works, and if it doesn't work, we know we're right. That's not going to work. But we do know from our graphing that no solutions had parallel lines. So if we remember, if we go back to the graphing one, when we had no solution, they were parallel lines. Well, we know that parallel lines have the same slope. So to check this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to make sure that they have the same slope. So in this equation here, y equals 4/3 x minus 7. Well, 4/3 is my slope. So now I'm going to take the other equation, 4x minus 3y equals 15, and I'm going to solve to get the y by itself. So I start by subtracting 4x. And then I'm going to divide everything by -3. So negative divided by a negative is a positive 4/3, and then 15 divided by -3 is -5, and you'll see that my slope is 4/3. So since the slopes are the same, that means that these are parallel lines, so there really is no solution. So we were able to check to make sure we were right. All right. So we have one more example, and I'm sure you guys can guess what the answer is going to be. Let's go ahead and take a look. So again, they solved this so that way the y was by itself. So I can go ahead and I can take what y equals and I can put it in to the other equation instead of y. Okay. If I didn't have a variable by itself, all I would have to do is just get one of the variables by itself, and then I can use substitution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this here, so I have x plus 2 and then times y, which is -1/2 x plus 4 for y, equals 8. So now I'm going to distribute. I already substituted. So 2 times -1/2, so that would be -1. And then 2 times 4 is 8. So x minus 1x would be 0. And then 0 plus 8 equals 8. So 8 equals 8. that's a true statement, so that means that our answer is infinite solutions. So, we could just guess a random number and plug it in to see if it works, but guessing an actual set of numbers that's going to be on this line is not very likely. So what we're going to do instead, just like with the last one where we went to see if their slopes were the same, to see if they were parallel, infinite solutions are the same exact equation. They're the same line. So we're going to go ahead and check to see that these are actually the same line. So for our check, so in this one we have y equals -1/2 x plus 4. So I'm going to take this other equation, x plus 2y equals 8, and I'm going to solve to get the y by itself to see if it's the same equation. So I'm going to start by subtracting x. And I get 2y equals -x plus 8. Then I'm going to go ahead and divide everything by 2. And I get y equals, and remember if there's not a number, it's really a 1, so -1/2 x, and then 8 divided by 2 is 4. And I have the same exact equation. So since it's the same exact equation, then it definitely is infinite solutions. And that's how you solve using substitution.